The next global war isn't coming, it is already here. It's raging right now at the bottom of the ocean and inside the exact data servers holding your entire life. Look, we are facing a complete infrastructure blackout, and today we're breaking down the architecture of this new battlefield. Because here's the terrifying reality. Sovereignty is completely migrated away from physical borders. It's now baked directly into the protocols of code, which means every single piece of your private digital infrastructure is a loaded geopolitical weapon. Just imagine waking up and finding your city's power grid, the local hospital network, or your financial system completely paralyzed. Why? Because the underlying cloud infrastructure is owned by an entity thousands of miles away. As the Indian Express put it perfectly, the switch can be thrown from a boardroom in another country without your consent. Real authority today isn't about territorial borders anymore. It's about who actually has the power to design and govern these underlying digital systems. And right now, just beneath the waves, authoritarian governments are literally rewiring the internet's physical topology. Get this, a staggering 64% of Chinese state-owned telecom cables now land directly inside China. Only 36% bypass the nation. This is absolutely not about internet connection speeds. It's about engineering massive, inescapable espionage choke points. When the world's data is forced to route through these physical landing stations, state actors can intercept literally everything, from your everyday global financial transactions to highly classified military intelligence. The cables themselves are now tools of mass surveillance.
And this undersea dominance? It forms the absolute backbone of China's overarching Digital Silk Road initiative. They launched this massive project back in 2015 as a highly calculated effort to drag global digital infrastructure under one single sphere of influence. By 2020, we saw them aggressively expanding telecom networks all across Africa, effectively locking developing nations into a strict reliance on foreign, state-backed hardware. Now they're pushing hard toward a 2026 goal of total global tech dominance. The cold hard fact we have to accept is that infrastructure corridors, not borders, determine global power. Whoever controls these underwater digital pipelines gets to dictate physical supply chains, hardware availability, and material prices for the entire world.
But that physical control is currently slamming head-on into an absolutely irreconcilable legal paradox. Okay, so on one side, you have the U.S. Cloud Act. This is an aggressive piece of legislation that essentially lets United States law enforcement compel U.S.-based tech companies to hand over data no matter where in the world those physical servers are sitting. But then, on the exact opposite side, you had the 2026 EU Data Act. This European law strictly and deliberately mandates blocking that exact same foreign access. It's literally an impossible situation. A US cloud provider operating in Europe is trapped between two completely opposing laws. If you follow the law in one country, you instantly become a criminal in another.
We call this nightmare the jurisdictional trap. So many businesses out there mistakenly think they're safe because of their standard corporate agreements. But let me be clear, this legal war zone cannot be solved by a contract. First of all, your standard corporate terms simply cannot override the sovereign laws of a nation. If an enterprise runs European data on US-controlled infrastructure, they are forced to break a continent's laws the second a subpoena drops. Second, those subpoenas demand your data in highly readable plain text. And third, standard data processing agreements, or DPAs, those contracts meant to handle data privacy, they completely shatter and expose massive compliance gaps when actually tested by international law. Your infrastructure is literally turning into a legal battlefield. And this existential vulnerability is causing a massive, concrete financial fallout worldwide. We're currently tracking a massive 35.6% spike in global sovereign cloud spending. It's violently pushing the market to a staggering $80 billion by 2026 alone. The psychology of the entire market has completely flipped. Major corporations and governments are finally waking up to the fact that relying on external providers in foreign jurisdictions isn't just some standard vendor lock-in risk anymore. It is a critical, fatal strategic vulnerability that could literally shut down national operations overnight.
But when you break down that $80 billion, it reveals a deeply unsettling global imbalance. China is aggressively sinking a massive $47 billion into fortifying its own digital borders. Meanwhile, North America is trailing far behind at just $16 billion, and the rest of the entire world is sitting at a mere $17 billion. Western nations are just now realizing that true data sovereignty isn't a regulatory checkbox on a compliance form, it's a hard architectural property. I mean, look at recent events like the Iranian cyber attack on regional AWS facilities. That definitively proved that if you want data sovereignty, you need rigorous physical security and strict jurisdictional control, not just empty corporate promises.
So how do you actually survive this? You have to look at the military reality. Protecting critical intelligence requires extreme, uncompromising measures. The NATO Cloud Directive enforces brutally strict cryptographic standards, rigorous change control protocols, and heavily guarded data center security. This isn't just about throwing up a basic firewall. They rely on what's called federated survivability tactics. That means taking your critical workloads and distributing them across independent, highly secure nodes. So if one data center is compromised or even physically destroyed, the entire military network just keeps running without a single hiccup. It's undeniable proof that critical intelligence has to be protected by mathematical certainty and distributed architecture.
To get that kind of military-grade security, organizations are having to build structural fortress defenses. We're talking single-tenant EU deployments, policy-enforced geofencing to lock data strictly within borders, and immutable audit trails that physically cannot be altered. But the absolute most crucial weapon you have is customer-managed encryption. It's often called Bring Your Own Key or BYOK. This means you hold the actual mathematical keys to decrypt your data, not the cloud provider. This is exactly what's required under Schrems II, that landmark European privacy ruling that completely nuked previous international data transfer deals. When you hold the keys, a foreign government subpoena is rendered technically moot because the cloud provider only has unreadable, scrambled ciphertext to hand over. Look, before we trace the absolute final wire of your digital footprint, you have to take action. If you want to survive the coming infrastructure blackout, you need to arm yourself with knowledge. Subscribe and like this explainer right now to stay informed. Because in this new era, ignorance doesn't just mean you fall behind. Ignorance means total digital vassalage to whoever owns your infrastructure. And tying this whole data crisis back to the brutal physical hardware scarcity makes the threat even deeper. The massive explosion in artificial intelligence over the last 6 months has driven RAM and storage costs up by a terrifying 500%. This astronomical spike means building your own independent data centers is becoming prohibitively expensive for most countries. So everyone is relying on massive, centralized hyperscalers, which leaves African states, European nations, and your very own business dangerously vulnerable to foreign export controls on advanced GPUs. If a nation literally cannot acquire the physical hardware to compute its own data, they are handing their entire future over to external, foreign-controlled operators. So, after all of this, it leaves us with one critical, unavoidable question. When the blackout hits and that switch is inevitably flipped from a boardroom across the world, who really controls your digital identity?